Okay, so now we got our dress, and this is how far we've got. We stitched our shoulder seams together, and I said that you should press your shoulder seams open like I did here, and then I did exactly the same thing for my facing. This is my facing, as you can see. My overlocking is blue, so it's clearer for you to see. And then I ironed my facing seams open as well, like I instructed the last time. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to attach the facing to my dress. So making sure that my shoulder seams are open. I put it flat down like that. This is my front. You can see I got a front notch over there. And I'm going to put my right side. This is the right side of my facing. This is my front. This is my front, as you can see. I'm going to put the right side to the right side down onto the dress like so. Okay. And then I'm going to put my shoulder seams on my shoulder seams of my dress. So my facing shoulder seam on the dress shoulder seam, right sides together, and I pin it in like so, like that. I do exactly the same on the opposite side. I do it shoulder seam to shoulder seam like that. I make sure that both seams are open under my fingers, and I pin it in like that. And then when I get to center back, sorry, I align that and I put a pin in like that. This is my opposite center back, and I put a pin in, and now I've got my center front, which has been notched here. You can see it's been notched there, and it's been notched on the dress as well. It's very important for notches so that you can keep your alignment straight. So I'm going to put my two notches against each other like so, and I'm going to pin it in. Right, so now your facing is ready for stitching, right? So now we go over to the machine, and if you make sure that you can actually feel that there are no creases under your two sets of fabric, putting my needle down, and I'm taking my pin out, and because it's 1 centimeter seam allowance as you add it on your pattern, I stitch it in 1 centimeter, and I can feel as I stitch that there's no creases, and I use a seam guide because I don't want to lose the meterage of the fabric. And I go around and I turn it, and I get to my shoulder seam. I take my pin out and I get closer to my center front, and I feel all the way around, and I can feel that there are no creases underneath, and I take my pin out and all the way around. You do this as slow as possible because we don't want you to make any folds in your fabric. Take my pin out, and I continue around all the way until I get back to center back, like so. And I back tuck, and I take my fabric out. So now you've got your stitching, and it's gone all the way around, 1 centimeter all the way around. And here where two seams are laying on top of each other, so here's your bottom seam, here's your dress seam, and here's your facing seam. We actually call that bulk, because when you turn it inside out, it creates a thick seam on the inside and it lays a little bit heavy on the top, and we don't want that, so we cut it away. So I put my needle on the inside of the seam. If you can see that, I put my scissors, sorry, on the inside, and I snip it off like so, and do exactly the same. Be careful not to cut into the seam. I just cut the top off like that. We turn it inside out, and I trim this just to lay flat on the body like so. Make sure that yours doesn't get caught like mine. And I do exactly the same thing on the inside, where I nip it off. And again, please make sure not to nip it off too close to the seam, because we don't want the seam to move, or we don't want the seam to unravel. I'm doing exactly the same on the other side, like so, like so. This is a very tiny piece, and I'm going to nip this off just to get the fit properly, like that, and like that. Okay, so now that we've nipped up all the bulk, the important thing is, especially when it comes to a rounded circle like this, that's not going to lay flat on the body, because it can't curve properly into the shape of the neck. Because of this extra here, this will restrict the curve of the neckline. So when we get closer, this is my center back where we are. So I'm starting closer to the first curve, which is there, and I nip in. Be careful when you nip in that you don't nip into the seam. As you can see, it's got a little bit of a space between my scissor and the seam. You nip it in, and we actually go all the way around the neck doing that, just to make sure that the curve is perfect, like so, like that. Okay, all the way around until the curve ends. And then I'm going to lay my fabric down once again, like so, because as you can see now, I've got my neckline is stitched in, I've got my nips in, and now you can do that. So now I take my thumbs, I put my thumb on the shoulder seam here, and I take the other side and I put my thumb on the shoulder seam over there, like so. So you can see where I'm putting my thumb, over there, putting my thumb in there like so, and I'm turning it in like that. And with your fingers, make sure that the shoulder seam is open perfectly like that. And I'm going to put a pin in there so that it doesn't move when I iron it. And then on the opposite side, on the shoulder seam, make sure that your shoulder seams lay flat on each other, that there's no creases or anything hindering that shoulder. Make sure that the shoulder seam is perfectly open, like that. And then we're going to go to the iron, and I'm going to iron my neckline flat, like so. So when it comes to the ironing of your garment, make sure that your seams are open, that you can see this actual seam. And you see there's nothing, there's no extra fabric on the inside there. I take my iron and I press it flat, like so. I tap it so that it actually can cool off, and I go around and I maneuver this entire neckline with my hands so that it's open. I open the seam up with my hands and my fingers, like so, and I iron it like that. And I'm going to turn it a little bit further. And you do this all the way around until your entire neckline has been ironed perfectly flat to your garment, like so. That. So it can be a little bit cumbersome in the beginning, but do try and get it as perfect as possible. So now my neckline is in. And now we are going to top stitch it. I'm going to top stitch this. So top stitching is actually there. I'm taking my pins out. I'm taking, your top stitching is there so that this doesn't come forward. Your facing must never ever come forward. It must always stay down to the back like that. So when you stitch your facing in, when you stitch your top stitch your facing in, your seam allowance that you just nipped like that must always go towards the facing. So this is to the dress. Your seam allowance must go towards the facing like that. So this section over here, once you put your fabric and your garment down on your machine, make sure that your seam allowance, which is this, goes towards your facing like that. So I'm going to start a little bit away from the center back. I'm starting closest to my shoulder seam, and this can be about 2 millimeters away from the edge. So I'm going to just open this up. You need to open this up as you stitch. And I start with stitching my back tack. And I do this quite slowly because you have to follow the curve of your facing. Right, you just get an extra nip in there. Right, make sure that your nips are enough in order to follow the line of your facing, follow the line of your neckline. So as you can see, my facing is open as I do this. Like that. Make sure that your lips are open and towards your back as you, towards your neck, your facing as you do this. Make sure not to get any of your actual dress caught in this process as you go along. Like that. And I'm going to stop where my last nip was made. Now I'm going to double tap, back over there, take it out. I trim my cotton because it's clean and it's neat, and I like neat work. Both sides, and then I'm going to show you what this actually looks like. Right. So this is the inside of my facing. As you can see, there's a stitch line all the way around, like so. So this facing is actually not going to come out again. And that's my neckline. That's how it's done. So the last step that I wanted you to do, because the rest of it we actually have to do in class, and I would prefer for you to actually see this be done in person, because watching it via a video might not be as descriptive or visually descriptive and instructional as it could possibly be. So I want you to do this last step, and then we are going to continue the next steps in class. So I'm going to open this up, and now we are actually going to clean off the armholes. So as you can see, everything lies flat if you put it out straight like so. And then we need now to stitch the facing into the armhole. This is the armhole, this is my neckline, this is my opposite armhole, and this is quite obvious, right? And in order to actually stitch this in the proper way, it can be a little bit tricky, but if you re-watch this section, it can be very helpful. So what we're going to do is I'm going to take, this is my facing and my outer together, like so, and I'm going to turn it in to the opposite side. So I've turned this entire dress into the opposite side. Remember, this is my armhole over here. This is my dress outer, and this is my facing on the inside there. So I'm going to put that over like that. I'm going to sandwich it on the inside, like so. So now I've just folded it back, and I'm going to put my hand underneath, and I'm going to fold this back like so. So now I've got my outer fabric and my facing in my one hand. So now I'm going to do it again. I'm going to unravel that. I'm going to do this again. This is my neckline. This is my armhole. That is my armhole. Right? I'm going to take my armhole from the opposite side, and I'm going to turn it in to the opposite end. And I've got my outer dress here, my outer armhole here, and I'm folding it over the whole dress like that. I'm putting my hand underneath, and I'm bringing that over. So as you can see, this armhole, this shoulder seam is going to touch the facing shoulder seam on the other side, and my whole dress has been closed on the inside like that. So now that I've got my whole dress on the inside of my shoulder, I'm going to put a pin in at the shoulder seam like that. Right? And I like to just put my finger in from the other side so that there's no dress caught in the seam. So I'm going to follow the rest of the line over here, which is my underarm, my shoulder and arm seam. Put a pin in there, and I'm going to put a pin in here. This is my opposite side. And I'm putting my finger in there once again, just to make sure that there's nothing caught in that seam, like so, and like so. So now my whole armhole has been pinned, if you can see. See, my whole armhole has been pinned, and I make sure every time that there's nothing of the dress caught between these two sandwiches. So now we go to the machine. I prefer using my seam guide, and I'm going to start at the corner. Take my pins out. And I'm going to go around. Take my pin out. Again, making sure that there's nothing of the dress caught inside, and I'm going all the way around 1 centimeter as you're supposed to. So, take a pin out. And all the way around. Like so. And I've got my 1 centimeter allowance all the way around that I'm stitching. Take the pin out. Okay. So now that I've actually stitched my entire armhole, like so, as you can see, it's perfectly stitched. I'm gonna cut the bulk off again over here. cutting it off like so, both sides. See, I cut into the stitching there now. Please don't do that. Please don't cut into the stitching. Okay. So now that we've got the arm all stitched like this, I'm going to nip exactly the same way I did with my neck into the armhole, so that once I iron it, it's a perfect curve, like so. Okay, do this slowly, so that you don't cut into any seams, because that would mean that you would have to restitch, and that's just not what you want to do. So we're going all the way around like so. Okay, so now that I've got my whole armhole notched and nipped, I'm going to pull my dress through. Right? So now you've got your neckline, your opposite neckline. You've got your neckline over there. And this is my armhole that I just finished now. And I'm going to iron that quickly. Let's just iron this quickly. So I'll make sure that my facing follows the line of the dress, and I follow the line of the facing, so that you can get a perfectly rounded armhole, which is like this. Okay, and then I open this up on the side. This is the back. Now make sure that my seam is totally open. We don't want any fabric that's a little bit been caught in the ironing over there. So we open it totally to its full extent, like so. And I'm going to open this up for you so you can see what it looks like now. So now I've got my one armhole done, like that, as you can see. So this is my neckline, that's quite obvious. That's my armhole that I just did now. And for repetition purposes, and I probably think it's good that I do it again, I'm going to do the other side. And I'm going to, as I did previously, I'm going to fold in, roll my opposite side in, like so. And this is my shoulder seam over here. And this is my facing over here, and I pull that over like that, and I pin my two shoulder seams together like so, and I pin my underarm seams together like that, and the opposite underarm seam like that. And then I just continue with another pin just to secure it when it's under the needle, it doesn't move. Make sure that none of your dress is caught in your pinning. Like that. And we're going to go to the machine. And we're going to stitch it in exactly the same way that we did with the opposite side. Just make sure that, again, that there's no creases, or there's no folds as you stitch this along. Okay, just make sure, always put your finger in there so that you can just make sure that it's not getting caught. Like so, take your pin out. Stitch your arm all the way around. Like so. Okay, so I've got my bulk again here. My bulk is where two seams lay on top of each other. I'm cutting that out. Okay. Okay. And now obviously, like we did the last time, we nip it in. Nip it in all the way around. All the way we nip it, just to make sure that there's no there's nothing restricting the curve of the armhole. Right? And then again, once again, we pull the arm through. Right. So I did exactly what I did on the other side. I just did it on this side, and I'm going to iron this. And then when I fold it open, it'll be so much more clearer as to what just happened. In short, I just replicated what I did from the one side to the other. So I'm going to just turn it out carefully. Like so. Make sure again that your seams are turned out properly. That there's no extra fabric caught in the seam, especially when you iron it down. So and everything is, just make sure that it's, just use your fingers. Your fingers are vital when you're busy opening a seam at the iron. Make sure that it lies flat on your garment when you iron it. So just putting these two together so you can see what this looks like properly. So and this is what we've got. We've got a dress with a facing, and this is how far I want you to be now. And when we return to campus again, and then we'll put the zip in, and we'll close the side seams, and we'll do some zip samples. But this is how far I want you guys to be now.